They arrived by taxi. Three attackers entered the Ataturk airport late Tuesday and opened fire with automatic weapons. After confrontation with police, they detonated suicide vests, blasting apart the terminal, killing dozens and injuring hundreds. The Turkish government says early signs point to the involvement of ISIL, the terrorist group operating across the Turkish border, of course, in Syria. For the latest, CCTV's Stephanie Freid joins us from Istanbul. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us. More information, of course, pouring in every hour. Stephanie, what do we know right now about the attacks?
Well, the very latest that we're getting, Nathan, about the three attackers that pulled into the taxi area, as you noted, is that one served as a diversion. One of those attackers detonated himself in the parking lot, and that served as a diversion for the security forces at the airport, who were then wrapped up with that bombing. The other two ran into the airport and then created chaos there, opening fire in the airport and eventually detonating themselves, explosives, of course, strapped to all three of the bombers. Also, we know, aside from the fact of the victims, we know the number now, 42. Among those victims, a number of foreign nationals, including people from Iraq, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and so on. Again, as you said, the Turkish government is pointing a finger at ISIL. No one has has actually claimed responsibility for these acts yet, but the Turkish government seems fairly convinced that ISIL is behind it. There's an investigation going on, and now the Turkish government is trying to get the airport behind me up and running, or they have it up and running. They're trying to have it go back to normal, as well as have the country go back to normal. Nathan?
Okay, Stephanie, what's the security situation in Turkey right now? How's the government responding, considering Turkey's had a lot of attacks over the last year or so?
They have had a lot of attacks, and one would think, or it appears, that certainly in the airport compound, there's a huge beefed up presence of security, people wearing full flax, military gear, automatic weapons in the airport areas. However, there seems to be certainly a sense among the Turks and among foreigners that the security situation is deteriorating. Specifically, I'm referring to a U.S. military impending ban on families of military personnel stationed in Turkey joining their family members who are serving in the military here in Turkey, and that is due to a quote-unquote deteriorating security situation here. Now, that ban was on the chapter. It was to be discussed before these bombings happened. However, it's difficult to believe that the U.S. government would not now implement the ban after the bombings. Nathan?
Stephanie Freid in Istanbul, thanks for bringing us the latest. Now, joining us now is our panel, Hakan Erdemir, a former member of the Turkish Parliament. And in London, we have Hakan Cemuz, is a Turkish political commentator. David Gartenstein-Ross is a senior fellow with the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. And from New York, we have Ali Çınar, is executive vice president with the Turkish Heritage Organization. Hakan, I want to start with you because you're a former member of the Turkish Parliament. You've recently moved here. What's the mood of the Turkish people after this attack?
Now, this is not the first attack. Turkey has been targeted repeatedly, both by ISIL and also by the Kurdish separatist PKK and its offshoot TAK. So Turkish society is actually quite seasoned for terror attacks, but the repeat nature of these attacks and the large scale of the attacks are actually bringing the mood down.
And this is also an attack on a lot of Turkish citizens. Before ISIL-inspired attacks looked like, David, that they were attacking foreigners, or in the case of a lot of Kurdish attacks, on the security services, correct?
Yeah, well, you also had the attack, of course, that occurred back in October against a peace rally, which was attributed correctly to ISIL. That was a devastating attack against civilians, the deadliest one that ISIL has carried out within the country. What makes this unique is just how international the target is. You previously did have ISIL attacks against tourist targets. You had a suicide bombing happen earlier this year. But the Ataturk airport, anybody who's been through Turkey knows that airport. It's an iconic airport, one of my favorite airports in the world, and one that is thought of as being, correctly, so secure that it's a very heavily symbolic attack.
Hakan Jamuz, you're in London. There have been several attacks, of course, claimed by ISIL. This one hasn't yet. We think about Brussels, of course. Was Turkey ready for this, considering it's had other attacks this year, an increasingly unstable environment? Is it ready to react to this sort of new phase?
As the previous commentator said, Turkey has been fighting against terrorist organizations like ISIL and PKK. So society in general do know what kind of operations these terrorist organizations conduct. So we're not immune to this as a nation, but airport and such a big scale attack, this is first. So there's a shock of it. But we will overcome this because we're quite strong in uniting when it comes to confronting terror. As the leaders of the country have been saying since the attack, and as the world leaders have been commenting it, we will unite and overcome this initial shock of such a big-scale attack that happened in the biggest airport in Turkey. It is the international hub. This is the gateway for those who actually go abroad and for the millions of tourists that come into Turkey. Like the other commentator said, it's a prominent symbolic figure. That's in the minds of Turks.
Over 60 million people, I think, is the third busiest airport in Greater Europe. Ali Çınar in New York, there have been some critics to say that the Turkish government didn't necessarily take the threat from ISIL as seriously as they say the Kurdish threat. What are your views of that? Obviously, it's too early to pin blame on this, but obviously people want to see security.
Well, I mean, for Turkey, PKK or ISIL is the same as both of them are terrorist organization. So Turkish government and Turkey is suffering with the terrorism over 40 years, lost 40,000 citizens past 40 years. So, I mean, Turkey is fighting against terrorism, either ISIL or PKK. And I would like to highlight that 2013, Turkey designated ISIL as a terrorist organization. And 2014, in March, ISIL attacked in Turkey's border and killed 3 citizens, 1 police officer, 1 military personnel, and 1 citizen. And then ISIL is already attacking Turkey past 2 years. So it's not new for Turkey, and Turkey is a strong country that fighting against ISIS and other terrorist organizations. And I think right now the US and the other Western allies are strongly supporting Turkey on this fight.
Of course, the global fight and repulsion against this sort of terrorist attack is evident. Hakan, what have ISIL got to gain attacking Turkey?
Now, ISIL has been very careful in attacking targets in Turkey because Turkey is not only a symbolic target, good for publicity, but at the same time, Turkey is a good recruitment source. Various polls show that 8% of the Turkish public have sympathies toward ISIS. And we have seen over the years...
And that's millions of people.
That makes more than 6 million people. And over the years, we have seen that hundreds, if not thousands, of Turkish individual citizens have joined and fought among the ranks of ISIS, which means ISIS has to do a balancing act. And we have seen this with the earlier attacks. ISIL first targeted mainly Kurdish, secular, liberal gatherings, and assuming that the Turkish government would turn a blind eye to such targets. And then the 2 next targets were the tourist groups in Istanbul. And this is the first time with the Istanbul airport attack that ISIL has struck a predominantly Turkish and Muslim group, because of the 42 victims, with the sole exception of the Ukrainian tourist, 41 appeared to be either Turkish or Muslims from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Tunisia, Uzbekistan, and China's Xinjiang province.
David, why now then would ISIL attack?
Few reasons. One, Adnani, Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, who's the spokesman for ISIL, released a message calling for attacks in the last 10 days of Ramadan. So that may deal with the specific time of the attack. Secondly, you had the rapprochement between Israel and Turkey. Now, that can't be the proximate cause because this was an attack that had to be weeks in planning, but there's a chance that they moved it up to try to make it come right after that rapprochement occurred. Third thing is that ISIL has been generally surging their attacks outside of the Syria and Iraq caliphate. They've been losing ground.
So that's why they're doing it, you're saying?
Well, that's generally why they're surging attacks throughout the world. Now, one attack alone cannot be attributed to being an act of desperation, but the fact is that ISIL is losing ground. They're about to lose their capital of Sirte in Libya. That's their African capital. And so it's a network on the decline. As a result, they've been lashing out and trying to carry out all the attacks they can to show that their brand is still strong and to try to encourage others to come in to either join the caliphate or to act out in their name. I think that the surge in general terrorist attacks, including when you look at what they've been doing in Europe and elsewhere, is related to their ongoing loss of territory and their ongoing losses on the battlefield.
Hakan Camus in London, there has been some criticism about the porous borders between Turkey and Syria, allowing for the free flow of fighters, some finger pointing at Turkish nationals or Turkish government perhaps funding some opposition groups. Has this got a part to play if you look at the bigger picture?
I totally reject that. I can give you numbers, but it'll be so boring. I tell you, I know for a fact tens of thousands of people have been either stopped or deported from Turkey who tried to cross into Syria. And I know there has been over 800 cases going on in Turkish court for aiding and abetting terrorist organization, i.e. supporting ISIL, those who have actually been caught with materials. And these are nationalities from different countries, mainly from North Africa or even Europe. There have been actually a lot of cooperations between most of the EU countries in America, especially Britain. They have been cooperating with the Turkish government, and they've been openly saying it all the way from Washington to London, that say that they have cooperated with Turkey in tackling ISIS threat. The borders have been tightened more securely. Cooperations between NATO allies are continuing, with Incirlik base being open to the operations. So there's various cooperations going on between the world community in tackling ISIS. So to blame Turkey, who has the longest border with Syria and then with Iraq, it will be unfair. What's fair is to say there could be uncontrolled areas within such a big scale, and there could be some leakage from those between the two countries, and you couldn't control everything all the time, 24/7. But it doesn't mean Turkey isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing as a state. And it's been proven, and it's been praised for doing what they're doing in controlling the borders. So it wouldn't be fair to criticize Turkey on its own for not doing enough.
That said, Ali Chinar in New York, there are jihadist networks, presumably as a result of these porous borders that are difficult, as Hakan said, to control within Turkey. What is the policy now should be of the Turkish government, considering they've had to focus so much on the Kurdish problem as well?
While from the beginning right now, Turkey was saying that the Western allies should share the intelligence information much stronger. I mean, if you think a British passport who has the ISIL fan comes to Turkey without any visa, I mean, British or French, if they have a passport and the Western allies doesn't inform Turkey that it might be a potential ISIS fighter, Turkey is going to let them in Turkey. And when we think 511 miles border of Syria with Turkey, it's not easy to capture and monitor the border as well. But the good thing is right now, Turkey has started to have a relationship again with Russia, strong relation as well with the United States, fighting against ISIS. So we see more collaboration, and we will see more collaboration in the near future. That might also make a big pressure on the ISIS side.